It all started in Ohio University, noticing all the new technology and fashion trends. Farmville, a game where a handful of students were playing. It's a game that intended to allow people mentally escape the fast pace of the city life. More of a way to build more of a genie sense of belongings to a larger community life, just like it's used to be back on the farm 100 years ago. Pretty much this is saying that since new technology is uprising, everything's starting to change. Many more are into the new technology. Happy Farmers game launched in 2008. 20% of China internet population, or more that 80 million, were playing this game. This is a game that's pretty much through cyber online, and you have to maintain your crops. Always have to be watering them, weeding them, and tilling them in order for your crops to grow and for you to being able to succeed in the game. And then as they start seeing that this was becoming more of a habit, people were more into their games. The Chinese employers and government officials reported that the video game addiction was more of a way to break down the deviant. Video games can impact lives by promoting negative life outcomes. Labeling theory, sociologists developed early in 1960, which was best known for general social behavior. Deviance is divided into two central ideas of symbolic interactionism. Interaction, deviance, any kind of human activity, is a collective action involving more than one person's act. Symbolic, the interaction between supposed deviant and the conformist is governed by the meanings that they input to each other's actions and reaction. Meaning, various refers to be by symbolic interactionism. As a symbol, significant gestures and interpretations, definitions, or labeled. A dynamic process of symbolic interactions between both deviants. Whom labels who? Labeling theories, people who represent the forces, law, and order, as well as the conventional morality, typically apply the deviant label to those who have allegedly violated the law and morality. Example, the labeler includes police, judges, and prisons, as the labeled are criminals, juvenile delinquencies, drugs addicts. Also, if you were to be in white or to be in black, who's going to get charged with the worst? It would end up being a black person's because of their to be known for that. It's never going to change, something that's been happening throughout the years. A white person is not going to get labeled as bad as someone with color. The idea of powerful labeling the weak as deviant runs through not only labeling theory but also other constructive theories.
My name is Juan Castanon, and I'm going to be going over consequences of labeling, consequences for the labeled, consequences for the labeler, and evaluating labeling theory. Labeling a person deviant may have some consequences for the person so labeled and also for the labeler. For consequences for the labeled, being labeled deviant can produce negative consequences for the individual so labeled. If one person is being labeled deviant, they are more likely to see themselves as deviant, which in turn leads them to continue the so-called deviant behavior. This process of becoming deviant was long ago discussed by Frank Tannenbaum. In his view, a child may engage in many forms of activities such as breaking windows, annoying people, climbing over the roof, stealing apples, and playing hooky. Parents, teachers, and police may define these activities as a type of nuisance delinquent. The child will be more likely to become one and later on a criminal. In the process of becoming a criminal, Tannenbaum implied that there are two types of deviant acts. For the first act, which the child considers innocent but which adults define as delinquent. For the second act, it is the final behavior in which both the child and adults define as delinquent. In 1951, Edwin Lambert made an explicit distinction between these two forms of behavior. He called the first primary deviation and the secondary deviation. Lambert sees the difference between primary and secondary deviances as more than temporal. This behavior becomes secondary deviance only when the person comes to agree with the society definition of the behavior as deviant, seeing himself or herself as a deviant. Labeling and theorist interest in analyzing the process of becoming a secondary deviant, that is how a person goes from primary to secondary deviation. Once being labeled, the individual tends to suffer a negative consequence by continuing to engage in deviant acts as a secondary confirmed or career deviant. Labeling a person deviant tends to create positive consequences for the community that applies the label. Once the consequence is enhanced social order, the deviant effect does us a great service by teaching us what evil is like, presenting himself or herself as an object lesson for what we shall suffer if we do evil. Encourages us to avoid punishment and yoga. And this theory has also drawn a lot of criticism, of which only person are addressed in this section. Because the theory is not meant to explain what causes primary deviance, it can be used to explain how labeling causes secondary deviance. Labeling encourages further deviances, but many others do not. Teenagers who are publicly labeled as juvenile delinquent for having been convicted in court for an offense are more likely than their no-labeled peers to get involved in delinquent acts again. Finally, labeling theory cannot logically deal with hidden deviance and powerful deviant acts. Labeling theorists and effects suggest that powerful cannot be deviants because they can only be labelers.
Phenomenological theory. Labeling theory since the 1960s has influenced many sociologists, but later on some sociologists developed a new version of symbolic interactionism called phenomenological theory. Other names for this term are ethnomethodology, existential sociology, creative sociology, or sociology of everyday life. Phenomenological theory delves into people's subjectivity, including their consciousness, perception, attitudes, feelings, and opinions about deviance. It assumes that all kinds of people, whether deviants, are highly subjective in constructing, defining, or interpreting deviance. Critique of positivism. Phenomenologists first launch a philosophical attack on sociologists who adopt the positivist view of deviance. In Chapter 1, some positivists ignore how deviants think and feel about their own deviant experience, but on the contrast, phenomenologists consider the deviant subjective experience the heart of deviant reality. In other words, positivists do not study a phenomenon as it really is, but rather study their own conception of the phenomenon. Positivists have long assumed that the real phenomenon and the positive conception of it are identical, but to phenomenologists, the real phenomenon is different from the positive conception of it. Subjectivism as the key to deviant reality. People disagree over the meanings of deviance. For example, a self-caused death should be interpreted as suicide if there is intention to die. But since the intention to die is difficult to determine after the person is dead, disagreement is bound to exist over whether the deceased had the intention to commit suicide. Therefore, this implies that the meanings of deviance are fundamentally problematic for positivists. Their conception of deviance cannot possibly get at the essence of a deviant phenomenon. Abstract meanings are the positivists' so-called objective. scientific interpretation of the deviant subject's behavior, while situated meanings are the subject's subjective interpretation of the subject's own behavior. Alfred Schutz, a founder of phenomenology, refers to the abstract objective meanings as constructs of the second degree and the situated subjective meanings as constructs of the first degree. Phenomenologists insist that the positivist subjective idea about deviance is actually their own idea, and at best a pale representation of the deviant experience they study. First emerged in the early 20th century as a philosophical movement in France that questioned the basic values of modernism, such as innovation, rationality, objectivity, and other similar values represented by modern science and technology. The philosophical thought started to influence the arts and social sciences in the United States in the 1960s and the late 1980s. It has become a well known, though poorly understood, theoretical perspective in American sociology. Postmodernist theory contains both old and new ideas in the sociology of deviance. First is the theory's attack on the search for objective truth. To postmodernists, objectivity in modern science is actually subjective because it involves the scientists imposing their own privileged professional view on the subject under their investigation. This shows that the subject's own views are important for understanding deviance. Another old idea is what developers call deconstructionism. This term is defined as tearing a text apart, revealing its contradictions and assumptions, which means any phenomenon or event such as deviance. In other words, deconstruction is said to involve the breaking up of something that has been built, as in demolition, and exposing the way in which it is built. One new idea of postmodernist theory is linguistic domination. It assumes that a linguistic conflict exists in any social interaction, with the language of the strong dominating that of the weak.
Hello, my name is Alisha Brisco, and the first part I will be covering is ethnography and application of phenomenology. Phenomenologists are sociologists who want to know the reality of deviance by looking at how their participants feel and think about other people's deviance as well as their own. This is known as ethnography. So, the phenomenologists would rather be called ethnographers because their definition of ethnography is to understand why their participants went through their different experiences. 19-year-old Agnes was born with male genitals and raised as a boy, but during his teen years, he secretly took his mother's hormone pills, resulting in him having soft skin, large breasts, a slim waist, and wide hips by the time that he was 17. Agnes wanted a sex change, but had to do extensive interviews with Harold Garfunkel. Through the interviews, Garfunkel found that she saw herself as a normal woman and not like a freak like the others would. She saw herself with a deformity in which she wanted it, the penis, removed. Jack Katz found just as Agnes sees herself in a positive way, so do murderers and robbers. They see themselves as morally superior to their victims. After killing or robbing their victims, the murderers or robbers receive a self-righteous feeling of doing the right thing because they were able to kill or rob them due to the fact that their victims were weaker than they are. There are many studies to prove this theory. For example, Candace interviewed many serial killers, and they all view themselves as being normal and ordinary.
According to William Chambliss, there are two kinds of law. One is the law on the books, the ideal of law, and the other is the law in action, the reality of law. According to the law on the books, legal authorities ought to be fair and just by treating all citizens equally. However, the law in action shows that legal authorities are actually unfair and unjust, favoring the rich and powerful over the poor and the weak. People blame the difference between these two types of law on the personal evil of lawmaking and law enforcing individuals, but Chambliss believes that those individuals are influenced by the historical and organizational background of the law instead of their own personal character. Modern American law stems from the legal system of early England. Before the 11th century, personal wrongs were settled through reconciliation between the parties concerned with the issue. During the 11th century, personal wrongs were considered transgressions against the state, and only the state had the right to persecute and punish the culprits. To uphold this new legal principle, the government created two separate bodies, the legislature, which was the lawmakers, and the judiciary, which was the law enforcers, the judges, and juries. The legal reality theory is that laws change in favor of the ruling class. Historically, criminal law has served the interests of the rich and powerful rather than the interests of the poor and the weak. An example is in 14th century England, when vagrancy laws reflected in favor of the landowner's need for cheap labor by requiring poor able-bodied men to work for low wages. Law enforcers tend to become tools of power and privilege due to organizational imperative, which is the nature of any organization to perform tasks that will maximize rewards and minimize trouble. An example is that it is more rewarding to prosecute powerless people such as drunks, prostitutes, rapists, and thieves than it is to make the same effort to process well-respected middle and upper-class citizens.
Alright, my name is Michael Calzada. I'm going to be going over Marxist theory. Alright, Marxist theory of strong bodies of work that are influenced by philosopher Karl Marx. Marx's main focus was for the social needs to begin with the economical structure at the base of his problem and build upwards. Alright, socialism would become a sole means of survival. Humanity would inevitably split into two categories that would contend the structure of capitalism. Working class and those oppressed by those in the working class were the two categories. Marxism focused on the control of deviant behavior, describing how the powerful control the powerless. Deviance begins with the sense of control that can be derived from the nature of capitalism. Marxist believes that capitalism defines the working class. As humanity evolves, profit must be increased, forcing labor workers to work faster as well as longer hours. Work is not only given to the lowest bidder, but shipped to low-rate countries to concentrate on what we call cheap labor. Labor machines are created to increase productivity and replace workers from the labor force. By labor workers being forced out of work, this creates alienation, separating persons of working class due to the exploitation of capitalism. Those forced into exploitation would soon become lower-class individuals, forcing themselves into crime to maintain some type of proper living situation. Marxist refers to these people as marginal surplus population. Capitalism forced many into a fall, creating not a property. Capitalism forced many into a fall, creating not only a property deviance amongst lower class individuals, but personal deviance as well. This included assault, rape, murder, etc. Along with some type of mental illnesses, the sense of powerlessness lead many to alcohol and suicide. Violence became a means of frustration for those suffering from emotional difficulties.
Hi, my name is Edward Breceda. Today I'm going to be talking about feminist theory in regard to deviance and deviant behavior. Traditionally, all theories in regards to deviance are meant to apply to both sexes. However, feminist theorists disagree. Feminist theorists argue that theories of deviance primarily embody male characteristics and behaviors which do not properly correspond with those of women. An example is Robert Merton's enemy strain theory, which assumes that the deviant behavior is caused by the strive for material success. Although this may be true for men, Charlotte Perkins Gilman maintained that, in contrast to men, women do not want to fight, to take, to oppress, but rather emotional fulfillment. Historically, women have been oppressed and marginalized in the labor field. Although there are greater opportunities for men to attain high positions and gain economic success, women are less likely than men to develop deviant and criminal behaviors once the availability of opportunistic economic success becomes unattainable. Although not stated in the book, feminist theories generally reflect the ideas of white middle class women while failing to acknowledge root causes of deviance amongst marginalized and oppressed women of color. Merton explains that the cause for deviant behavior and crime in the United States stems from the correlation between the large emphasis on success and lower opportunities provided to attain that success, specifically those for people of color and women of color. Although this may be relevant to men, this is not the case for women. Although women have historically had lower opportunities for economic success, crime rates in comparisons to men are still much lower. Early feminist theories centered women as victims, specifically those of rape, sexual harassment, and domestic abuse. When women do commit crimes, however, they tend to commit the types of crime that reflect continuing subordinate positions in society, such as welfare fraud, petty credit fraud, passing bad checks, and property crimes. Not surprisingly, though, most women who do commit crimes are unemployed and have had psychological trauma in their.
Evaluating phenomenological theory. Phenomenologicalists differ from positivists due to the fact that positivists do not see the deviant reality. Many phenomenologicalists think this reason makes their theory superior, but it doesn't. It just makes them different, just as different types of sociologists differ from others. With this being said, the phenomenological theory tells us that deviant behavior through the person's understanding of their experience is different from the positivist's view of deviant reality, therefore allowing us to see both sides of the subject with more perspective and understanding. Conflict theory. Conflict theorists are sociologists who look at conflict such as social and cultural in modern day societies. Social conflict is between diverse groups of people that have different interests, needs, and or desires. Cultural conflict is what is viewed as right or wrong in cultures. So, what may be viewed as a wrong in one culture may be accepted or viewed as right in another culture. Both social and cultural conflicts have been known to have criminal behaviors tied to it. Up until the 1970s, conflict theorists have always looked at criminal behavior rather than the actual definition. Today we have many conflict theorists with the same basic views but different criminal definitions.
And now for evaluating critical and conflict theory. Conflict theorists blame the capitalistic or in the egalitarian society for the prevalence of the deviant labeling as deviant activities. Critical theorists now argue for it social equality were achieved, forms of human nastiness would greatly decrease rather than completely disappear. With no obligation of poverty in full egalitarian society, social inequality would be reduced as a cost of crime. However, white-collar, corporate, and state crime would still exist unless other steps are taken. Critical and conflict theories greatly contribute to our understanding of how social inequality, such as capitalism, patriarchy, influences the making and enforcing of norms and rules or laws or the definition, production, and treatment of deviance in society. Conflict theory is useful explaining the motivations behind the formulation of laws. For example, why the powerful bother to pass laws against such as non-political acts as illicit sex, gambling, drinking, even loitering. Laws against those trivial deviant acts serve to preserve these capitalistic values, the system, and hence the dominant position of the powerful.
And the last part I will be going over is the power theory. How much power a person has or does not have influences the type of deviance a person is willing to do. Just like power affects the type of deviance, it also affects the cause. There are 3 reasons why the powerful are more likely to commit profitable deviance than the powerless to commit less profitable deviance. The first one is the powerful have more motivation to commit deviant tasks than the powerless people. This means powerful people tend to set their goals higher than the powerless people, but it is usually so high that one cannot reach it. The second reason is the powerful have more deviant opportunity than the powerless. They have more access to resources to commit such devious crimes. The third reason is the powerful have much less social control than the powerless. The powerful often have an in with the law enforcement, whereas the powerless usually do not. These 3 reasons are why the powerful are more likely to be involved with powerful deviancy than the powerless involved with the powerless deviancy.